with my daughter, Ann Kidd Taylor. And I'm sort of excited about that because Anne is my first reader of all my books. She's the one I give it to chapter by chapter. And so she has a kind of front row seat to my work, and particularly this book, the Book of Longings. So I'm happy to be able to do that. Plus, we co-authored a book together, Traveling with Pomegranates. It's a mother-daughter memoir. So I'm glad you're here, Anne.
Yes, I am thrilled to be here, and I'm Ann Kidd Taylor, Sue's daughter, and as she said, the co-author of Traveling with Pomegranates, and I'm the author of the novel The Shark Club. You know, I had to stop and think about one of the last times that we did this, and we did a lot of speaking for Traveling with Pomegranates, and what I remembered was that people love to say a lot when they discovered we were writing a book together, are you two still speaking? Um, and we would laugh and say, yes, we are still speaking. And so here we are, all these years later, we're still speaking. And we're doing our first Barnes and Noble Facebook live event. So I want to thank Barnes and Noble for bringing together this wonderful community of readers and giving us this opportunity to connect with them and talk about the Book of Longings, which just came out yesterday, and it is available at Barnes and Noble at bn.com. Before we start and jump into all the questions, I hope I don't embarrass you, Mom. I have to I have to say that tell everyone that just today the AP said that the Book of Longings is an epic masterpiece that is a triumph of insight and storytelling. So congratulations.
Well, wow.
Too good not to pass on.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. I have
Well,
no words to respond to that one.
that's amazing. Um, so we're going to dive into the Book of Longings, which I think is really a saga in how you portray the life of Anna in this really like this sweeping arc of a life of Anna, and she's a first century woman who writes stories about women to bring them in from the peripheries where they've been forgotten and sidelined. Mostly what Anna longs for is to be a voice at a time when women were largely silenced. So I'm sure that there is a lot that readers want to know about this novel and about Anna and about you too, and your writing process and all of that. So we're going to get started with a reader question, and the first one: what was the spark for the Book of Longings?
Well, there were all kinds of inspirations for this novel. First of all, it was a book I wanted to write for a long time. And I remember Toni Morrison said that if there's a book you want to write and it's not out there, then you must write it yourself. So it was sort of like that. But I think probably the main inspiration was this character of Anna herself. She sort of wandered into my imagination one day, and I could see this fictionalized wife of Jesus, and I wondered about her. And I thought, if she ever really existed, she would be the most silenced woman in the world. And so I began to want to give her a voice and to tell her story. And it felt important to me to imagine this, because I think by imagining an alternate history, we can see things in new ways, experience things in new ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the inspiration was largely the character of Anna herself and how I wanted to bring her a voice and a story.
I love that it started with Anna. I love that it started with that creative impulse. And I think that's one of the things that I really admire about you is that um, you had that creative impulse and you listened to the truth of what your creative self wanted to write, And you followed through with that, even if it meant entering into some potentially controversial territory. So I really admire that. I love Anna's origin story. Um, okay, the
Well,
next.
I do think, Anne, that I've said it many times that writing is really mostly an act of courage. You know, you have to have something to say and you have to have the ability to say it, but the hardest thing is the courage to say it at all. And that is a quote by Maya Angelou. And so, yeah, I went way out on a limb on this one, but it was the book I longed to write, so I did it.
Okay, our next question is one of mine. You have said that you loved writing the Book of Longings, and you loved writing the character of Anna. So tell us why.
Well, I came to really love Anna, and as I tried to develop her character, she is, well, she's very gifted. She's brilliant. She's ambitious, feisty. I like her spirit. She's daring and rebellious too. She's a dissident, actually, in many ways from her culture and her religion. So her longing, as you said earlier, was to have a voice in the world, and she applies all of this, her superpowers, I call them, to this quest that she's going to be on to find not just a voice, but her place in the world, and and be able to write the stories of lost women. So what's not to love? I mean, I felt like I hope this doesn't sound crazy, but I felt like, in a way, I was born to write this book. And maybe every novelist feels that way a little bit about every book they're writing. Maybe we need to in order to write it. But I did feel that way, that it was just a very important book for me because, I think Anna represents the lost feminine in the religion. And that's been a topic that has been important to me for two or three decades. I have studied that and tried to understand that. So for lots of reasons, I love Anna and I love writing this book, mainly because I wanted to read it myself.
Well, I agree. I feel too very strongly that you were born to write this book. Um, and I'll tell you what I love about Anna. There's so much I love about Anna. I love that she doggedly pursued her passion. And she listened to it and she acted. Um, and she does this in a world and in an environment where she knows what is in store for her life. She sees what the life of her brother is like. She sees the opportunities he has. They don't apply to her. So even even in the midst of all of that, the circumstances, the limitations on her, she really believes in her longings, what she yearns to do, and boy does she do it. Um, okay, our next question, and I like this question a lot. It's about Anna and Yotha. And when it comes to Anna and Yotha, I think of them as this first century power duo. And I see this a lot in your work. This theme of pairing women, Lily and Rosaline in The Secret Life of Bees, Jessie and Kat in The Mermaid Chair, Sarah and Handful in The Invention of Wings. It's this theme of women sustaining each other. And in the Book of Longings, we have Anna and Yotha, and Yotha is Anna's aunt, and they really are each other's constants. Will you talk a little bit about Yotha's role in Anna's life and Anna's role in her aunt Yotha's life?
Well, Aunt Yaltha is also one of my favorite characters I've
Mhm.
ever written. I think she's
Yeah,
one of the most unique characters I've ever written.
I
And
agree.
everybody kind of needs an Aunt Yaltha. I wish I
Mhm.
had an Yaltha. She's an educated woman. And one of my favorite lines in the novel was Anna describing her aunt as having a mind that trespassed everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, she she had a feral mind. She was kind of untamed, and she was Anna's lifeline. And they formed a sacred bond in a way. And there was a mentoring thing going on here. I
Mhm.
think that Anna looked to her to see what she most wanted, and that was this fierce ability to achieve her longing in a culture that was totally arranged against her,
Mhm.
both her religion and her culture and her family. So she had a lot to overcome. And Aunt Yaltha, I think she looked at Anna as maybe the daughter she lost or didn't have. And I don't want to give too much away here because there's a whole sub story to that.
Mhm.
Um, there's a reading I'm going to do about these two, and it's a page long, but I think it says a lot about the role that Yaltha plays in Anna's life. My testament begins in the 14th year of my life, the night my aunt led me to the flat roof of my father's grand house in Sepphoris, bearing a plump object wrapped in linen. I followed her up the ladder, eyeing the mysterious bundle which was tied on her back as if it was a newborn baby, unable to guess what she secreted. She was humming a Hebrew song about Jacob's ladder, doing so rather loudly, and I worried the sound would tumble through the slit windows of the house and awaken my mother. She had forbidden us to go to the roof together, afraid Yaltha would fill my head with audacities. Unlike my mother, unlike every woman I knew, my aunt was educated. Her mind was an immense feral country that spilled its borders. She trespassed everywhere. She had come to us from Alexandria 4 months ago for reasons of which no one would speak. I had not known my father had a sister until she appeared one day, dressed in a plain, undyed tunic, her small body erect with pride, eyes glowering. My father didn't embrace her, nor did my mother. They gave her a servant's room that opened onto the upper courtyard, and they ignored my interrogations. Yaltha, too, avoided my questions. Your father made me swear not to speak of my past. He would rather you think I dropped from the sky in the manner of bird shit. Mother said Yaltha had an impudent mouth. For once we were in agreement. My aunt's mouth was a wellspring of thrilling and unpredictable utterances. It was what I most loved about her.
Mhm.
So that's really how this story starts with this mysterious bundle on the back of Yaltha's back that she is going to bestow upon Anna. And this mysterious object will then become an icon throughout the rest of the story.
Mhm. I love those lines of Anna's describing Yaltha that way. I love that that Anna. One of the things that Anna loves about Yaltha is that irreverent manner that she can sometimes have when she speaks. Um, Yaltha has some of the most creative and original insults that I've ever heard.
Mm.
And perhaps that might be another podcast of where in the world did some of those come from. But, Yaltha has some of my favorite lines, I think, too. One of them echoes the title of the book. She says, return. She's talking to Anna. Anna's feeling, I think, a little lost at the moment. She says, return to your longings. It will teach you everything. Um,
Yeah, I think that's actually true. I have always felt that our longings in the best sense of the word, are eloquent messages from the soul itself. I mean, if we want to know what we're about, we need to look at our longings, because they speak from a deeper place in us, probably. So that was what Yalta had in mind. Just return to them and they will teach you everything. Probably another one of my favorite lines, speaking of that, is what Anna composes as her prayer. So she writes this prayer that she will spend the entire book trying to achieve. And one of them is, bless the largeness in me, even though I fear it. And she calls this giftedness in herself, her abilities, her passion, her largeness. And, I think we all have a largeness in us. And Anna wanted to bring it forth, but we tend to fear it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one she writes in her prayer is, when I am dust, sing these words over my bones. She was a voice. And, when I'm dead and gone, I hope somebody will say that about me. So it's something that I think as a writer and as women today in this, right now in our culture, it's an important time to have a voice. We all have a voice. It's using our voice and bringing it forth. And, that's why I think this period of history and the story I'm trying to tell in this book, the Book of Longings, is relevant. I think there's relevance to it today. I believe there's a whole lot of Anna in a whole lot of women.
Yeah, I do too. A lot of relevant themes for us today. Okay, we have another question. How did you go about your research for this novel?
Well, it was a daunting prospect to do this research. Once I decided, and I did it almost instantly, I decided I'm going to write a novel. The day that idea came to me, I said, I'm writing a novel about this fictional wife. I had no idea what I was getting into with research. And I thought it would take me a few months. It ended up taking me about 14 months to research
I
this.
remember the Roman aqueduct period. It went on, and you just knew everything about the Roman aqueducts. And
Yeah, I
maybe
do.
that's when we knew it was, it was getting
We
low.
knew it
But
was a
the
problem.
research was meticulous, but it had to be, I think, is what you found.
Yeah, researching a historical novel is crucial to get the details, because that's what makes a book come alive and feel true,
Mm-hmm.
is that you have all of this rich material that is accurate. And I so wanted to get all this exactly right. So if there's a tree or a meal or a piece of furniture or an animal or whatever's in it, it has been researched and vetted.
Yeah.
But I think not the hardest, it was maybe the most enticing, and it was the longest and most grueling, maybe I'll say it that way. Research was about the historical Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And, I decided that what I wanted to do as a novelist was to portray the human side of Jesus. That is a side that seems often overlooked. And so I studied the scholars of the historical Jesus writings and books, and it felt like I read a tiny library of books about all that. And I watched documentaries, and I subscribed to these lectures where I could listen to theologians and religious scholars talking about all these things. But it was sort of fun, and it was also a way to avoid actually writing the book. And I remember when, I really was kind of stuck on that Roman aqueduct. And Anne came over and said, you really need to move on. So she did a little intervention with me, and I started writing soon after that.
Well, you got into the writing after the research. So, what is your writing process like? And do you have any rituals or favorite writing spaces?
Well, I'll start with the writing space.
Hmm.
Yes, I have to have a room of my own. When I started writing, I was 30 years old, and this sounds made up, but I wrote on an ironing board.
It
Isn't
sounds like something out of a Roald Dahl book, like the
Yeah,
Bucket Family.
it's really sad. It didn't last long. I mean, everything else was taken, and I could move my ironing board around. That's how it started, folks.
That-
Um,
That's
but
also
then,
quite an origin story.
um, but then I graduated to a room of my own, and
Hmm.
I once had some quotes stenciled on the stairwell that led up to my study. And the first one that you could read was by Virginia Woolf. And it said, "Every woman must have a room of her own if she is to write fiction." So we need at least some space. So I have a space, and we're in it right now. So you can see my books behind me.
Mhm.
But it's upstairs in my house, and it's not a large room, but it's cozy and it's full of books and turmoil and chaos. And when I'm writing, it's full of storyboards and outlines and collages and
Yeah,
things like that.
imagery. You use a lot of imagery. I mean, there were many days I came in and saw a lot of very interesting imagery on those whiteboards, and how can you talk a little bit about how the imagery figures in your imaginings, how it complements that, why you're drawn to it?
I guess I'm just very visual, and when I write an outline, it's often a drawing.
Hmm.
Uh, I like to draw the movement of the story and write and hang scenes off like on a clothesline. So I have my own little strange process of doing it, and every writer does, I guess. But I put up a lot of pictures, a lot of
Hmm.
images. I make a collage. I call it a collage. I think there's a fancy way to say what that is now in the literary world, but I don't know what it is. It, it's taking images and kind of creating them in a collage like um, on a board and drawing inspiration from them. It's what are we drawn to? And when I wrote The Secret Life of Bees, I had a collage that had a pink house in it, and it had a wailing wall. And all of these images turned up in the story. And of course, I do one for each novel. So it's a way to just let images speak to us now. So that's part of my writing process, and just kind of following my instinct as I
Hmm.
go, and kind of trusting what comes to me.
Hmm.
The big part of it. I would say that as a writer, we have to both trust what's in us and doubt it at the same time. And it's a balancing act. You just can't let those doubts get out of hand. I mean, if you're going to err, do it on the side of believing in what you're doing, but to question them and to run them, 2 and 3 times through your head.
Hmm. What kind of advice do you give your fans, many of which are aspiring writers?
Well, I'm going to say what most writers would say first, and that is to read and read and read.
Hmm.
I remember when I first, I was 30 and I wanted to be a fiction writer when I started, but I spent the next 10 years doing freelance writing, nonfiction writing. And I guess I read a lot of fiction, and it was so above my abilities at the time that it was hard to believe I could ever achieve it. But I think it is important to read at the level you want to write, and to read widely, and and you absorb a kind of standard and a bar that you can aim for. And the other thing I would say is to let yourself write badly when you start.
This was the advice that you gave to me that was really that I really needed to hear. I think a lot of writers, new writers who especially um, get caught up in this thinking of that the first draft that we turn out needs to be perfect or it needs to be near perfect, and when it's not, it can feel crushing when somebody tells you just how bad it is. So I think when you told me, allow
Yeah.
yourself to write badly, it's a rough draft. They call it a rough draft for a reason, like let it be rough.
Right. I
Um,
mean, you don't want to be, well, we don't expect somebody to sit down and play Beethoven the first time they
no.
sit at the piano. I think we need to recover as a writer. I would say, if you want to be a writer, let yourself be an apprentice and learn the craft. But most of all, not just read, but listen
Yeah.
to what's inside of you and find your own truth, your own voice, your particular way, and don't copy anyone else, but find your way and then trust that.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. Um, let's see. Who are some of the authors who inspired you early on?
Um, I remember reading Barbara Kingsolver
Mhm.
was super important to me as a writer who inspired me. And, I thought if I could just write like Barbara Kingsolver, it would be great. But of course, what you have to do is read these writers and then find your own way. But you can learn from them and be inspired by them. I loved her, The Bean Tree, um, Poisonwood Bible. So she was always important to me um, early on. And I would say Marilyn Robinson. And if you haven't read her book, Housekeeping, it's just a classic. And I read it and read it. It's the language is so beautiful, and so I mean, those two come to me right away. And then if I go way back, because those two authors were important to me as I started my writing career.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go way back as a reader, Charlotte Bronte.
Yeah.
I I can't tell you how much I loved reading Jane Eyre and just disappearing into that those moors and English villages and country houses. That
Yeah.
was I mean, we, of course, Anne and I went to, well, this was Anne's idea. She wanted to take a literary trip, and we went to England to Charlotte Bronte's home. And that was incredibly inspiring. And I'll tell you why it was so inspiring to me. It came just a few months before I got the idea to write the book of Longings. And while I was there, I discovered that just how brave Charlotte Bronte was, because nobody thought she should be writing. And she wrote to the Poet Laureate of England and told him her desire to be a writer. And he wrote back to her and said, this is not the business of a woman's life, nor should it be. And instead of being crushed by that, she was defiant, and she bravely went on to write Jane Eyre and turn England upside down. So, I think you can get inspiration from somebody like that.
I wholeheartedly agree. And that trip to the Bronte parsonage, we still have not gotten that out of our systems, truly. But and we did a few houses of writers here in America and in the Northeast. But I think there's something incredibly special about visiting the creative spaces and stomping grounds of writers that you really connect with. I found it to be at times surprisingly emotional. I don't know. I highly recommend doing that kind of literary travel if we ever get to travel again, and we will, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. Um,
If we can get out of the house.
right. Speaking of quarantine, why do you think books are just what we need during this challenging time? in quarantine?
It has been heartening to see how people have embraced reading during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And here, so many bookstores had to close, but people are ordering books and finding ways to read. And I think they gives people a sense not just of escapism or distraction. I think that reading is more than a solace. I think people are finding inspiration. They're finding meaning. They're trying
Mm-hmm.
to reflect on how to come out the other side of this global pandemic and crisis and rethink their lives. And books do that. I mean, to find stories, there's just nothing like finding a story that speaks to you and helps you sort your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are hungry for books again, and there's a little revival going on. So, you should go straight to your internet and order.
That's right. Um, yeah, the book bonding going on right now among uh, people in this very strange time is very heartening. Um, can you share a few book recommendations?
Yes, I've been reading during this time as I prepared for the publication of the Book of Longings. I was trying to do a little reading too. I read The Secrets We Kept by Laura Prescott. I thought it was a wonderful book. I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle, which was a firebrand of a book.
Yeah.
Um, I love audiobooks, and
Mhm.
I always keep one going. I keep about 2 books going on my bedside table, and an audiobook too. And I'm listening to The Silent Patient right
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through that, and it's intriguing. There's a book called Call It Grace by Serene Jones, who's a theologian, which I found profound. So I try to read, diversely. Um, and then there's The Shark Club, written by my daughter, a shameless plug, but it is actually a wonderful book.
Thanks.
And I mean, I could go on naming books. There's just
I
so many.
know there's a wealth of them. I'm listening to My Dark Vanessa by Kate Russell right now. And since it's Earth Day, I'll say I will recommend a couple of titles. The World is Blue by Dr. Sylvia Earle, who's one of the people I think I admire most. An oceanographer and a beautiful writer, the way she writes about the environment and does so in such a poetic way. She really was an influence, I think, on the writing when I wrote The Shark Club. And I love the work of Susan Casey. So those are, if you're looking for some inspirational Earth Day environmental
Mm.
reads, those are great. Um, so those are all wonderful titles, and there's a wealth of them. Well, I guess we want to thank everyone for joining us. We've come to the end of our time, and I've loved this discussion with you. And I want to thank Barnes and Noble again, and tell everybody that the Book of Longings is available right now, 24/7 at bn.com.
Well, let me thank you for talking to your mother about,
Well,
and
we only get to see each other over the fence now.
yeah, all right. Um, and to thank my readers. I don't get this chance very often to say thank you to readers of my work, and authors are so dependent on our readers in our bookstores, and I'm I'm grateful from the bottom of my heart, really, to readers who've supported my work over the years. And I want you to know that I love so much, as I said earlier, writing the Book of Longings. And I just hope that you love reading it as much as I loved writing it. So
Mhm.
I wrote that story for readers, and every day I would picture, writers sometimes have an image in their head of who they're writing to, and it's always readers I think about. So thank you for being with us tonight. And the Book of Longings can be found at bnn.com.
Yeah. Thank you. Good night, everybody.